To lacquer a fretboard or not to lacquer a fretboard? That is the question. Hey guys, if you value and appreciate the information that I share here on my Highline Guitars YouTube channel, consider supporting my channel by visiting eguitarplans.com and purchasing a plan for either building a guitar or one of the tools that you can use to build a guitar. And if you would like to help support the channel but want something more tangible, you can purchase a t-shirt from my merch shelf down below. Either way, there's links in the description. Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. Welcome back to my YouTube guitar building channel. A while back, I had done a video where I talked about my favorite finish that I like to apply to guitar necks, which is boiled linseed oil. And I made the assumption that viewers would understand that I was talking about not just the neck and headstock itself, but the fretboard as well. As a result, I've been getting a lot of questions from folks who are watching that video about what my favorite finish for a fretboard is. And it's the same. It's boiled linseed oil. I like to use boiled linseed oil because it's incredibly easy to apply. You simply wipe it on, let it soak in, give it a chance to dry for about 4 to 5 days, and then apply a second coat, let it dry for 4 to 5 days, and then apply a third coat. I rarely do more than 3 coats. One of the issues I think folks have with products like boiled linseed oil or tung oil is the word oil itself. I think people have this tendency to think that it's like motor oil. And motor oil, of course, always remains wet and liquid. It never dries. But that's not the case with boiled linseed oil or tung oil. Both are drying oils. When you spread them thin and they're exposed to oxygen, they undergo a molecular change called polymerization, and they dry. However, if you look at the top of a can of like boiled linseed oil or tung oil, you notice that it can get kind of built up and gummy. And that's what happens with the oil when it's exposed to air. However, when you spread it thin and let it soak in, it dries harder. It still might have a little bit of that gumminess to it if you put it on too thick and heavy, but if you spread it really thin and let it soak in and dry, it will dry harder. It's a resin. And that's where I think people get confused about boiled linseed oil and tung oil and whether or not it actually ever dries. And then there's other products like mineral oils and lemon oil and all kinds of other stuff. Boiled linseed oil and tung oil are not the same. They're drying oils, and that's really important to keep in mind. Another reason why I think people get kind of confused about finishing fretboards is there's this assumption that you have to treat lighter woods like maple differently than darker woods like rosewood. And that may be true to an extent. Because a wood is lighter in color, a fretboard is going to show more grime and dirt over time. And by applying a clear top coat like lacquer or polyurethane or polyester or whatever it is you want to use, true oil, you can protect the fretboard and keep it looking cleaner longer and make it a little bit easier to clean later. However, I prefer just to use the same approach whether it's maple or rosewood. I just apply boiled linseed oil. I rarely lacquer or put any kind of a clear coat over my fretboards. And I think part of the reason for that is because a lot of people are hyper concerned about the effect of clear coat finishes on perceived tone and sustain. And it drives me crazy when a person will look at a guitar body that's been clear coated with a polyester, and then the fretboard has been clear coated as well to protect it. They're concerned about how that clear coat on the body will affect tone and sustain, but they don't seem to pay that much attention to how it will affect tone and sustain on the neck. Now, I'm not going to say whether or not I believe the clear coat actually has an effect on tone and sustain when applied to a fretboard. I don't think it's really something you can measure or hear with the human ear, but it's just the mere fact that it's there that it's going to trigger people into thinking that it's going to have some kind of an effect. So I prefer just to leave the wood on the entire neck, including the fretboard, as close to raw as possible, but it still has to be sealed to protect it from airborne humidity and moisture. So a couple of coats of boiled linseed will accomplish that, or tung oil. And once it's dried and cured, the effort you need to put forth to keep that fretboard looking nice is just to simply clean it fairly often. That means whenever you change the strings, you're just going to want to wipe down the fretboard. And what I like to use is naphtha. It's the best way to clean a fretboard. Now, unfortunately, naphtha is getting really, really hard to find. So what you really have to do is look at a professional fretboard cleaning product. And usually these will contain naphtha in them. So you can get those online from a variety of different sources. You can also use lighter fluid, which is also naphtha, or charcoal starter, which is also naphtha. Now, unfortunately, sometimes these contain other chemicals, but I've never found that they have any sort of detrimental effect. And then once you've cleaned the fretboard, you can and this is not something you would do every single time, but maybe once a year or once every couple of years, is just apply a light coat of either the boiled linseed oil or tung oil over the surface, and then let it soak in and dry for 4 to 5 days before you restring the instrument and continue to play it. If you want to clear coat your necks and fretboard, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. I have no issues, and I'm not going to be one of those who will say, oh, you shouldn't do that because it could affect the tone and sustain. I just don't think that that's really going to be an issue ever with a guitar neck. However, when it comes to clear coating, what I will typically do is I will mask off the heel area so that there's no clear coat going to deposit on those surfaces, because I try to leave as much of a neck wood to body wood contact as possible. And again, that's one of those tone and sustain things. But if I were to show you me spraying a neck without masking it off, I'm going to get a million questions from people asking me, why don't you mask off the heel to prevent it from getting covered with lacquer? So, I'll mask that off, but the rest of it, I'll just clear coat right over it. And that includes clear coating right over the frets. Because what you can do after the clear coat has dried to a touch, not cured, but dried to a touch, is you can just run an X-Acto knife. I'll see if I've got one around here. I'll just run an X-Acto knife right on that edge on both sides. Then I'll mask it. Then I'll take some synthetic steel wool, like a coarse synthetic steel wool, and I'll just rub the lacquer right off of the fret. Now, of course, that's going to take a little bit of time to do all of them, but the result is quite professional looking. And then you can lightly level sand and polish sand that lacquer, and then buff it up to a really high gloss shine. It looks fantastic. But again, I'm not a real big fan of putting lacquer on my fretboard. As far as whether you should use boiled linseed oil or tung oil, that really, I think, is just a personal choice. And I think a lot of that has to do with price and availability, which means you're probably going to use boiled linseed oil because it's readily available just about any hardware store or paint supply store. Tung oil is a bit more of a specialty item. Now, that's not to be confused with products that you'll see labeled tung oil finish. To be honest, I have no idea what's in those products. I've even examined their material safety sheets, and I can't find a clear explanation as to what those products contain. Same is true with like True Oil. I hear all different kinds of explanations as to what that product contains, but I don't think anyone really knows for sure except for the companies that make them. if I'm going to use a tongue oil, there's really only one product out there I would consider using, and it's from a company called Sutherland Wells, and you can Google them to find out a little bit more about the company. But they make a product, it's a polymerized tongue oil, and what that is it's pure raw tongue oil which has been heated to very specific temperatures, and that triggers the polymerization process, but only partially. So it remains liquid, and then you can wipe it on, but as soon as it's exposed to air, it very rapidly dries. It's an amazing product. It's basically a pure tongue oil that's just been subjected to heat in order to trigger that polymerization process. The same is happening with boiled linseed oil. The difference is, rather than, I mean, when you see boiled, you think, oh, they must have heated it up and to a boiling point or something. No, that's just a carryover from the old days when that actually was done. What they do today, however, is they take raw linseed oil and they add hardening agents to it. Those are typically cobalt dryers, which are mixed in, and that helps to trigger that polymerization process when you spread it thin onto the wood. But that Sutherland Wells polymerized tongue oil is really amazing stuff, and in fact, I would call it my favorite finish for guitar necks and fretboards, if only it were more readily available. It unfortunately isn't. You'll have to order it online, and it is pretty expensive, so just be aware of that. But if you're set on not using boiled linseed oil and really want to use a tongue oil product, that's what I would recommend. When you look at some of the raw tongue oil finishes, products that are available from woodworking specialty stores, all that is pure tongue oil. And it works really well too, but it takes an incredibly long period of time to dry. We're talking like weeks, if not months, to fully dry. So I tend to avoid using that. It also doesn't have a really long shelf life. I noticed it can start to turn bad after a few months or a year or so. So the boiled linseed oil, I've had this can for years, and it's just as good today as it was when I first purchased it. Well, I hope that this video gives you an idea of what my favorite finish is for fretboards. In the future, whenever somebody asks me that question, I'm going to link to this video, and that should take care of it, and I won't have to type in this long-winded response. But it's boiled linseed oil, and it's inexpensive, it's easy to find, it's available everywhere, and it works really, really well. The only thing it will not do is it will not create a glossy sheen like lacquer or true oil will. And in the case of lacquer, I almost never lacquer my necks and fretboards because I don't like the way it looks and I don't like the way it feels. So I just use the boiled linseed oil. And if you want to use a finish that's going to give it a high gloss shine, then you would definitely have to consider spraying lacquer, or if you don't have spray equipment, using true oil instead. So, and then just remember that with lighter woods like maple, you will have to clean the fretboard more regularly because it will show grime much more easily than rosewood or ebony will. However, those woods still need to be cleaned just like maple does because the grime is there, it's just not as easy to see. But that's really part of the whole process of owning and playing a guitar and taking care of it. You have to clean it. Whenever I see guys with really grimy, dirty guitars, I figure that's not somebody who really cares about the instruments that they play and that they own. So, but that's a subject for a whole nother video, as is my opinion on true oil. I'm not a true oil fan, and I'll say that right off the bat. I think that that's a product, well, that's for a whole nother video. Maybe I'll get into that down the road. So hopefully you found this video to be useful. As you know, if you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up. That's a way to show support without having to spend any money. If you want to show some support financially, like I said at the beginning, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. And as always, make sure that you comment, you subscribe if you don't already subscribe. Share this video with other folks out there if you know somebody who might benefit from this topic or any of the other topics that I talk about on this channel. And until the next episode, take care and stay safe.